Autumn 1942. While the world watched the hell of Stalingrad, we were holding the line here at the Rzhev salient. They called it the cornerstone of the Eastern Front. We knew Stalin wouldn't let us stay this close to Moscow. The air was thick with anticipation and the smell of upcoming snow. We were waiting for the storm. General Walter Modellauer, Master of Defense. He didn't believe in retreating. He turned Lake Podosinovka fortress. We dug deep into the frozen earth, creating two massive defensive belts. We were outnumbered 3-1, but Model had a plan. He wanted the Soviets to enter his trap. The Russian Rasputitsa, the mud season, was our only ally. It slowed down the Soviet steamroller, giving us precious time. Our reconnaissance, led by Hans Krebs, was brilliant. We knew exactly where Zhukov would strike. While they gathered their masses, we gathered our shells. We were ready to bleed them dry. November 25th. The sky turned black from their artillery. It was the start of Operation Mars. Through the blinding snow, we saw the dark shapes of T-30 for tanks emerging. Our grenadiers held their breath. Let them come closer, the officers whispered. Then, the frozen silence was shattered by the roar of our MG-42s. The fight for the village of Klepanino became a nightmare. We turned the stone church into a nest of machine guns. The Soviet infantry kept coming, wave after wave, over the bodies of their comrades. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was a meat grinder. But our lines held, anchored by discipline and iron. In the sector near Bely, the Soviets finally managed to punch a hole. Their first mechanized corps poured through the gap. For a moment, there was panic in the rear, but Model remained calm. He had a hidden card to play the elite Grossdeutschland Division. We were just waiting for the right moment to strike back. Zhukov thought he had won. He ignored our reserves. On Model's command, our panzers struck from the flanks, cutting off the Soviet spearhead. Suddenly, the hunters became the hunted. Thousands of Red Army soldiers were trapped in the forests of Rzhev, with no fuel, no food, and no hope. We listened to their desperate radio calls in the freezing nights. They were begging for help that never came. Zhukov demanded they break out at any cost, throwing more lives into our crossfire. The fields in front of our trenches were covered with burnt-out T-34s. It was a graveyard of steel. Marpa Pratkatze Grossdeutschland Division, dies for best. Near Bely, they slammed into the Soviet flanks like a hammer. We saw their StuGs moving through the smoke, systematically picking off the T-3, for soup it wasn't just a battle, it was a collision of two worlds. And our discipline was holding firm. The Russian winter showed its cruelest face. Blizzards swept across the supply routes. For the Soviets, logistics became a nightmare. Their fuel trucks were stuck in the snow miles from the front, but we held the inner lines. Every night, horse-drawn sleds brought us warm food and fresh ammunition. We survived on iron nerves and hot coffee. We intercepted their radio traffic. It was haunting. No ammo, no support. High losses. We heard the fear in the voices of their young operators. Behind them stood the NKVD blocking detachments, preventing any retreat. In front of them our MG-42s. It was a tragedy of unimaginable scale, directed by Zhukov from his warm headquarters. In the ruins of the abandoned villages, our snipers fought a silent war. Every Soviet officer, every messenger, was a target. During the day, their air force ruled the skies, and we barely moved. The night belonged to us. Our Stostrups, assault squad slipped into their trenches, spreading panic. The Red Army was never safe in the forests of Rzhev. By early December, it was clear Operation Mars had failed, but Zhukov refused to see it. He desperately brought in more reserves, throwing them into the same meat grinder. Model had done the impossible. He stopped a force 3 times his size, but in the south had Stalingrad army. The first Mechanized Corps thought they had achieved a breakthrough. Instead, they walked into a slaughterhouse. Our panzers closed the gap from the north and south. What was planned as a triumphant advance became a tomb for General Solomatin's men. No fuel, no hope. Only the icy wind and the relentless fire of our artillery. On the night of December 15th, the remnants of the trapped Soviet corps tried a desperate breakout. Under the cover of a heavy blizzard, they charged our lines. It was chaotic, hand-to-hand combat in waist-deep snow. Some escaped, but they left everything behind: their heavy guns, their tanks, and thousands of their brothers. By the end of December, the big guns finally fell silent. Operation Mars was over. The cost for the Red Army was staggering: 215,000 casualties. While the world's eyes were on Stalingrad, the horror of Rzhev remained in the shadows. A meat grinder that consumed an entire generation of soldiers. Our victory was won, but at what price? We had won at our Zhev, but we were exhausted. Our 9th Army had lost over 60,000 men dead or wounded. We held the salient, but at a price that could never be repaid. We knew that one more blow of this magnitude and our front would crumble like dry glass. The strategic map of the East was bleeding red, and the shadow of Stalingrad was growing longer. January 1943. The news from the south was a death knell. The 6th Army was gone. Hitler finally had to face the bitter truth. The Rzhev salient, once our springboard to Moscow, was now a dangerous liability. We were a giant finger pointing at the enemy, waiting to be cut off. The order finally came: prepare for Operation Buffle, the withdrawal. Model and his staff began what would be the greatest logistical feat of the war. We weren't just retreating. We were moving an entire army, thousands of tons of equipment, and miles of telephone cables. New defensive lines were being built in our rear. We prepared every bridge, every depot, and every rail line for destruction. We would leave nothing for the Bolsheviks. March 2nd, 1943, we blew the old Volga Bridge. Rzhev, the city for which so many had died, was abandoned in absolute silence. Our rear guards moved like ghosts, leaving the trenches empty before the Soviet scouts even realized we were gone. When the Red Army finally entered the city the next day, they found only silence and mines. Stalin did not forgive failure. General Perkyev was sent to the Far East. Commanders Tarasov and Tarakin never saw a high command again. Even Konev was temporarily demoted. They had sacrificed hundreds of tanks and thousands of men, and yet the German front had not even buckled. Model, meanwhile, became the undisputed lion of defense. Today, decades later, the truth of Operation Mars finally emerges. It wasn't just a diversion. It was a failed attempt to end the war. In 1942, tens of thousands of soldiers from both sides still lie in the forests and swamps of Rzhev. It remains a monument to the cruelty of war and the tactical brilliance of an army that was already doomed. The valley of the Vazuza River became a graveyard. We had turned the terrain into a killing zone. The narrow paths allowed no room for their massive formations to deploy. Our pack, guns, anti-tank cannons were perfectly camouflaged. One T-34 after another remained burning in the deep snow. Their Steamroller turned into a traffic jam of burning steel. When Grossdeutschland was thrown into the furnace at Bely, it was a clash of elites. Our Panzergrenadiers, supported by StuGs, threw the enemy back in bloody hand-to-hand combat. The Soviet superiority shattered against our discipline. Their momentum was broken. The Russian winter showed its most cruel face, and their tanks began to run out of breath. The situation for the trapped Soviet 41st Army became critical. Stalin saw his savior, Georgy Zhukov, take personal command. He ordered breakout at any price. But Zhukov's ruthless tactics throwing masses of infantry against our fortified lines only led to even higher losses. We heard the intercepted calls. They were pleading for help that was never coming. On December 15th, the remnants of the 1st Mechanized Corps made their final move. Under the cover of darkness and a blinding snowstorm, they tried to break through. It was chaos. Many escaped, but they left their pride, their heavy equipment, and thousands of their comrades behind. The Corps existed only on paper. The Mars had officially failed. Walter Model rose to become the undisputed master of the defense. His ability to stop massive breakthroughs with minimal reserves earned him the reputation of the savior of the Eastern Front. But even he knew that the victory at Rzhev had only bought us time. The Reich was bleeding out, and the Red Army was learning from its mistakes. During the day, their air force ruled the skies, and we barely moved, but the night belonged to us. Our assault squads slipped into their trenches, spreading panic. The Red Army never felt safe in the woods of Rzhev. By early December, Operation Mars had splintered into 1,000 small, desperate battles. And we were the ones holding the knife. The situation for the trapped Soviet 41st Army became critical. Stalin saw his savior, Georgy Zhukov, take personal command. He ordered breakout at any price. But Zhukov's ruthless tactics throwing masses of infantry against our fortified lines only led to even higher losses. We heard the intercepted calls. They were pleading for help that was never coming. On December 15th, the remnants of the 1st Mechanized Corps made their final move. Under the cover of darkness and a blinding snowstorm, they tried to break through. It was chaos. Many escaped, but they left their pride, their heavy equipment, and thousands of their comrades behind. The Corps existed only on paper. The Mars had officially failed. Walter Model rose to become the undisputed master of the defense. His ability to stop massive breakthroughs with minimal reserves earned him the reputation of the savior of the Eastern Front. But even he knew that the victory at Rzhev had only bought us time. The Reich was bleeding out, and the Red Army was learning from its mistakes. Today, the details of Operation Mars are finally coming to light. It wasn't a diversion for Stalingrad, it was a failed attempt. To end the war in 1942, tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides still lie buried in the forests and swamps. Rzhev remains a memorial to the cruelty of war and the tactical brilliance of an army that was ultimately doomed. Rzhev was the school of war, cruel, bloody, and unforgettable. We held the salient, but we lost our future. As we marched away towards our final defeat, the ghosts of Rzhev followed us. History may forget the names of the fallen, but the earth of the Rzhev salient remembers every drop of blood spilled in the frozen mud of 1942. As the spring of 1943 approached, the strategic reality of the East had shifted forever. Our victory at Rzhev had saved the Ninth Army, but the loss of Stalingrad had broken the spine of the Wehrmacht in the south. We had traded space for time, but time was a luxury Germany no longer possessed. Every mile we retreated, the Red Army followed stronger, faster, and more vengeful than ever before. The fields of Rzhev became a graveyard of iron. Thousands of T-34s and Panzer IVs sat rusting in the melting snow, monuments to a struggle that the world tried to forget. We, the survivors, marched westward, knowing